Again, good morning, everyone. Once again, it's just so good to be together, don't you think? So thank you. It is my privilege to invite forward to lead us in prayer, Maya and Kayla.
Let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Lord our God, you who so mysteriously call upon us to share in the sufferings of Christ, fill our hearts with compassion for those who lack the warmth of a home. We commend to you in prayer this day all men, women, and children who suffer because they have no shelter, those who sleep in our streets and public spaces, who have nowhere safe to lay their heads, and who wander from place to place as a way of life. We pray for broken families who cannot pay the rent, for those who are the lost and abandoned, for those on the streets whose minds have been touched by illness or whose bodies are sorely affected by disabilities. We ask that your merciful grace be poured out upon those with addictions, those who have given up in the face of enormous tribulations, and those driven into a homeless life by crushing poverty.
God of compassion, your love for us is revealed in your beloved Son, Jesus, who was born into homelessness, lived with nowhere to lay his head, and died for us in agony on the cross. Inspire us to act in justice by all means at our disposal, to right the wrongs of peoples who are suffering the deprivations of homelessness, and to see in them the dignity of a brother and sister redeemed by Jesus Christ. Let us have the commitment, as people of the gospel, to be ever mindful of our obligations we have to the poor and marginalized, to work in your name, O God, and to turn sorrow into joy, and to bring all those who live in darkness into your own wonderful light. Amen. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Kayla and Maya. Today, we are lucky to have Father Greg Boyle join us and to share his work from Los Angeles. Work that stemmed from witnessing firsthand the devastating impact gang violence had on his community, the criminal justice systems, and policies of suppression, and the use of mass incarceration as a means to end gang violence. While serving as pastor of Dolores Mission Church in Boyle Heights, he and his parish community members addressed the problem of gangs and gang violence by treating them as human beings. This was a novel approach at the time and led to the creation of Homeboy Industries, which you may remember from last summer's read, Tattoos on the Heart. Homeboy Industries employs and trains former gang members and teaches them important life skills. What started off as a small operation soon blossomed into a huge enterprise. This program has grown to become one of the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry programs in the world. As you may remember in Tattoos of the Heart, on the Heart from Father Boyle, he weaves many narratives together to illustrate the work he's undertaken over the last 35 years. The story he shares are based on personal experiences as the leader of Dolores Mission Church and the Homeboy Industries, and importantly, focuses on both redemption and tragedy. Father Boyle reminds us that no matter our position in life, gang member or otherwise, no one is unworthy of God's love. Tattoos on the Heart reminds us that to truly reach the hearts and minds of others is to show love, hope, and compassion. Like Father Boyle and Homeboy Industries and their approach to inviting gang members into a loving and supportive community, so too has been our attempt or our desire to approach homelessness in a similar way. As we have discovered in Ignatius formation classes as we celebrate this year's Justice Summit on Human Dignity, homelessness is a complex, multifaceted issue impacting local, national, and global communities. While there is no one easy solution that works for everyone who is experiencing homelessness, like Father Boyle reminds us, all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The author of several books, Father Boyle has also received the California Peace Prize and has been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. In 2014, President Obama named Father Boyle Champion of Change. Currently, he serves as a committee member of the California Governor Gavin Newsom's Economic and Job Recovery Task Force in response to COVID-19. It is my honor to introduce to you Father Greg Boyle, but first we are going to hear from two incredible men who have experienced firsthand the impact of Homeboy Industries. Please help me welcome to the podium Raquan and Jose.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jose, and I work for Homeboy Industries. I'm a IT support specialist, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how I grew up. Let me see, where could I start? I grew up in a broken home family, where my dad was real violent, real aggressive, and I'm a third generation in my family that's gangbangs. My grandpa gangbang, my dad gangbang, so I gangbang. And as far as I could remember, I was defending my mom. He was real alcoholic, a real drug addict, and like from all the things that he did living in the streets, he'll bring that home. And as far as I can remember, like I said, I was protecting my mom, and there was this one incident that happened when I was like 4 years old, and I remember him beating on my mom real bad, and like I was getting in between them, because I would not let him put hands on her. And I remember there was this one pot of beans boiling in the stove, and just because he was so mad and enraged, he grabbed the pot of beans and launched that at me, and I screamed, I cried. And I could just remember my whole skin just peeling off my body, at 4 or 5 years old. And he still whooped my ass. He still, excuse my language, he still beat me up and everything. Sorry. And, yeah, and then ever since then, there was nothing but every single day of my life until maybe like I was 11 years old when he finally threw me out the house. I could remember just getting beaten, pistol whipped, kicked, broken jaw, broken ribs, and as I got older, he would get more aggressive, so, and not only that, he started involving me into his life. I remember at 8 years old, I never had the luxury of having a childhood, I don't know about video games, I don't know about playing, any kind of type of game. I didn't have the luxury of having toys or nothing like that. The kind of toys I had was drugs and guns. Those were my toys at the age of 8. So by the time I turned 10, I remember getting locked up for my first time, So after doing a year in juvenile hall, I finally came out. And the first thing my dad did when I got to the house was like, jail is for men, not for kids. Since you're a man now, you need to start bringing money to the house. I'm like, I'm standing there dumbfounded, like, what do you mean? Like I'm barely 11 years old. What do you mean I gotta bring money? Like, yeah, you gotta start bringing money to the house. If not, you could get on. And I cried like, nah, I'm not gonna leave. So again, he beat me up, my mom ended up beating me up. He ended up dragging me out of the house, So since I was 11 years old, that's when I started experiencing homelessness, I remember sleeping in park benches, in park slides. I remember picking up the creepiest, darkest alleys ever because I know nobody would go in there. There used to be this beat down couch right there, and that's where I would sleep at most of the times. As for food, like I'll do what any kid would do for food, like steal, go to supermarkets and jack some chips. And, like I didn't know how to cook, so to me, food was chips, soda, and candy and stuff like that. So because of that is what led me getting shot 4 times, got sent to a coma and stuff like that. And I started my journey in incarcerations, going to juvenile hall, camps, YA, and stuff like that. Let me see. So I always had in my mind that I was never gonna amount to nothing, because this is all I knew. I never knew anything besides that wall. All I knew was just sell drugs and gangbang. That's all I knew, And especially since around where I grew up, that's everything everybody's seen. Nobody gave us the opportunity to see us who we are, or see us or give us the opportunity to become somebody else than what everybody see from the outside. As years prolonged and I got older and I was finally able to come back home, instead of finally be like, oh, this is home, it wasn't home. It was just a place of torture. Like I said, it beat downs, fights, shootouts with my dad. Between each other, it was hectic. So when I finally did my longest stretch in prison was 7 years. When I finally got out, I'm like, I can't be living like this. If I've been shot 4 times, if I've been homeless since I was a boy, if I've been sent to a coma, I'm here for a reason, and I'm not gonna keep wasting my life like this. I'm not, So through those 7 years, I met this beautiful girl, that is the mother of my kids now, and I was still bringing that to them, And I'm like, I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be the dad that he showed me how to be, Because honestly, he never showed me how to be a man or a father. He was never around, And when he was, it was just hectic. So I met Raquan, Through this process, I ended up losing my kids. And he was the one who brought me back to Homeboy Industries, And told me like, hey, there is just a different way to do this, Like for some reason, he's seen something that nobody else did, As well as Father G. And that's where I started my process of changing my life around. If it wasn't for Homeboy Industries or Father G or like my friend right here, Raquan, I wouldn't be the man or the father that I am now to my kids. Because even before I lost my kids used to tell me, Daddy, you want to play hide and go seek? I'm like, what? What is that? What's hide and go seek? I'm like, why do I gotta hide and why do I gotta go seek? Like it doesn't make no sense to me. Like I didn't know the concept to that, And I felt real ignorant and dumb, like what is? But I mean, at the same time, like never really was that hard on myself because I never had a childhood. I didn't know how to be a kid, and thanks to my kids, now I know how to be a kid. I'll be getting in the park slides now with them, swinging, running around in the dirt. Like it's fun, like something that I never knew how to do. And thanks, like I said, thanks to Homeboy Industries, and a lot thank you for Father G. I became a better man now. And one thing for sure, I'm not the man that my dad showed me how to be, or neither the father he showed me how to be. I'm not a nobody no more. I'm a somebody now. With that, thank you.
What time is it? Oh, good morning, everyone. My name's Raquan. I'm also an IT support specialist for Homeboy Industries. I'm actually training this guy right here. He's a superb gentleman. But so anyways, I'll talk a little bit about my childhood as well. I was raised in a single mom home, My dad, I'm second generation gang member. My dad was a gang member, so he never was around. He was always in and out of jail. Whatever he was doing. He was never there as a father for me. What I had, my mom did the best she could, but what influence I had as a man was my uncles, which were gang members as well. So, instead of taking regular field trips with my family, I took different type of field trips, the field trips that like rappers talk about, it's no fun and games. I used to be like, chilling. Sometimes every morning on the bus stop, my uncles would have me beat up somebody just for fun. Mostly older people, I wouldn't pick on younger people. I would have to fight older people. They would jump me just to try to toughen me up. Different things. My mom tried the best she could to help me out, like to prevent me from going down their path. So I would come home from school and my room would be all tossed up because she raided my room, she'll find a little whatever she found in there, what I'm saying? And it was like, oh man, she's like the police. It's like, so me and her had like a sibling rivalry. We had a rivalry because I'm like, dang, she's like the cops. Like, you're worse than the cops. You're over here taking all my stuff. I'm paid money for that, And so yeah, it was kind of complicated, She wanted the best for me, but I couldn't see it. I was too busy trying to be like, what I thought was a man, because my uncles, they would protect me, like if someone was to try to hurt me, they'll be there, and they'll handle it. Or like I had a stepdad, if he tried to say something, then they'll step up and check him or whatever they did. So I went down that road thinking that, hey, this is what it's like to be a man. This is what it's like, to be strong, to be tough, to be respected, to have all of that stuff, right? And we didn't really have much money. My mom struggled, so I would come home sometimes to eviction notices on the door, and I'd be like, dang, like we're broke, like we don't have nothing, like what are we gonna do? We're gonna be homeless. So instead of asking her for stuff, I used to freaking go to middle school, and I used to get like aspirins from the cabinets and Tylenols and Benadryls, and I used to act like, oh, they're drugs to the kids like in my school, and I'd be like, make my little money, and they didn't know that it's not really drugs. But anyways, so anyways, yeah, it was kind of hard, just trying to find a way to make money and figure out how to get out of that struggle and not have to worry about being homeless. And after a while, I transitioned to more extremities, and I eventually ended up being incarcerated. After I got incarcerated the first time, I experienced homelessness for real. So I was sleeping in the back of a Nissan Frontier. It was probably like a 2000. I was sleeping in the trunk. We'll put a tarp over our head. Have to watch out. Someone tries to look in, because sometimes people we'll park like in a area where not too much traffic. So sometimes people ride through on the bike, try to peek in, like, hey, I'm in here. It was tough. Homelessness was tough. Figuring out, hey, how I'm gonna shower. So I would get like a job at a temp agency, and some nights I would stay there at the motel or something just so I could shower, get a good night's rest, and then I'll go back to the streets the next day. And I had to go through that transition. And I was on and off for about 2 years, homelessness. I would get a good job. I'll live in a motel that rented monthly, and then I'll end up losing that job, so I wouldn't have a place to stay again. Stayed in like trap houses, which is like abandoned houses with cold water, showers, only cold water. It was just a struggle, just to maintain, trying to get a breakthrough. And going through that breakthrough, I ended up being incarcerated again, and this time I was facing some time. And I told myself, because it was a different experience, it was a life-changing experience. I think I needed it, because I realized that my friends weren't really my friends. The people that I thought that loved me and were there for me, that I had hope in, that gave me that sense of family, belonging, hope. They turned on me. So I was like, they don't love me, and I need to love myself. And so I said, if I make it home, I'm gonna love myself. And so I made it home, and that's what I try to do. But once again, I experienced homelessness. I was trying to make it home without a house to come home to. So one day I'm talking to my homie, and he's telling me like, oh, I'm gonna go get tattoo removal at Homeboy Industries. And I'm like, what? That's where I can get a job. It clicked in my head right away, because I always heard about Homeboy Industries, but I just never went. I never had the courage to go, But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do good for myself, so I'm gonna go and show up. So I showed up. I waited for a minute, and I kind of got discouraged. I took off, and I something in my head told me to go back. I go back. I see Pops. I talked to him. He hires me right there on the spot, and he was so warm and welcoming to me. He gave me this love, a sense of belonging, a sense of acceptance, like family. And I never felt that from a person off the jump like I felt with him. So I was like, this is where I belong. And sure enough, I went through the 18-month program. I graduated a little bit early, actually. They helped me get into my apartment. They taught me all the IT stuff I know, enrolled me in school and everything. They really helped me change my life for the better. Like they turned what I wanted into a reality, my dreams into a reality. They guided me there, through the programs, through the classes. I healed myself, and I was able to develop as a regular human being, knowing what a normal life is, instead of knowing what the only life I knew before. And so if it wasn't for him, honestly, I don't think I would be here right now. I don't think I'll be free right now. I don't think I'll be doing anything but what I'm used to. But this gave me that push that I needed, that leap forward, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be with you. It's really been such a privilege to travel with Raquan and Jose. And so we've been staying in Seattle, so they saw the Space Needle, and we've eaten well. And we were driving here this morning, and they were asking me what a preparatory school was, and so I explained that. And then we kind of get into like, what is a Jesuit school? So there are, at Homeboy, there are like 3 Jesuits who work there, but I'm not sure it's a thing that it's on front of people's minds, like what is a Jesuit? And I was sitting in my office one day, and it's a glass enclosed office, so I can see from my desk the whole reception area, and And, I'm sitting there and I have 3 people in front of my desk, and we have a lot of tour groups that come, from all over the world. And there was the tour guide was a homie named Osvaldo, and he has what the homies would call a loud-ass voice, and so he's giving the tour, and he kind of parks the tour group right in front of my office, and it's one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat kind of moments, and I wave faintly, and he says, and this is Father Greg Boyle. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest. And I kind of gave my best moves. What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said of your time here at Bellarmine. It's not the place you've come to, it is the place you go from. And in this Justice Summit week, you go from here to live as though the truth were true, and to put first things recognizably first. You go from here to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which are only 4 things. They're big, but only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. You go from here to imagine the world looking differently than it currently looks. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But part of being at Bellarmine is that you don't wait. You make things happen. The Zen masters would say that there's no such thing as an enlightened person, only enlightened action. So you go from Bellarmine to take action. Not just to point things out, but to point the way and to choose to be a light that people can see by. So you go and you stand at the margins, because that's the only way they'll ever get erased. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? You go from Bellarmine to dismantle the barriers that exclude, so that the world will resemble more and more what God had in mind, a community of kinship, of connection, where there is no us and them, and you obliterate the illusion that we are separate. So you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And you will go from Bellarmine to stand, with any luck, with the great privilege to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You will go from here and you'll stand with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and you will stand with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused you may well be on those worthy goals, they really can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. Homelessness will continue unless we know that. Gang violence will continue unless we know that. This morning, really watching the sun come up in Seattle, and the streets were just filled with madness. People screaming and sleeping in blankets and running across the street, and nobody has ever chosen madness. It chooses them. And all of us were born into this world wanting the same things. We're human beings. We all share the same last name. Beings. So it's been the privilege of my life for 30 years to work with gang members and to get to know people like Raquan and Jose. I'm on the road a fair amount these days, especially after the, kind of, I don't know if we're in post-pandemic, but anyway, I'm traveling a lot again, and so I'm so reliant on texting. I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, and the homies, I hate this autocorrect thing. A homie just texted me saying that he got in a fight and he thinks he has a concoction, which I think was a concussion, which wasn't his fault. It was damn autocorrect. I had a homegirl named Bertha, a tough cookie, who'd been to prison, was kind of a shot caller for her gang. And on a Sunday, she texted me and she said, "Where are you at?" And I texted her back, "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas," which is nuns, sisters, religious women. "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas," and I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought, was pretty darn interesting. Even now, just this morning, it's like, oh my God, are you in the office? I need to pay my rent, or I got my this, or my bill, or my phone is gonna be cut off, and my car payment, And a homie texted me once, he says, "I just need $100 to finish off my rent." Well, I didn't have it. So I texted him back, "Things are tight." And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote me back, "Sorry to hear that." What about my rent? Well, at 10 minutes to 9 every day, we have a morning meeting, and 500 people are hanging from the rafters in this small area, and we have announcements and the thought for the day and a prayer to begin the day. I always tell the homies it's the most important 10 minutes of the day. And afterwards, I had to take two homies like these two guys, and they were going to help me speak at a high school in Palm Desert, and Manuel and Poncho, older vatos, tattoos, been to prison, and Manuel's in the front seat. And so we're driving, and Manuel gets an incoming text, and he chuckles, and I said, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning. Manuel and Snoopy work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of gang members. It's a tough job. I wouldn't want it. Occasionally, gang members can be attitudinal. So I said, "Well, what's he saying?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb. Hang on, let me find it. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy." Oh my God, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. We just howled with laughter. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. Jesus says it this way, that you may be one. He doesn't say do good and avoid evil. He says, no, kinship, connection. It's not about morality, because the moral code has never kept us moral. It's just kept us from each other as we strike the high moral distance that separates us from the other, the homeless, the gang member, the returning citizen. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate? And how do we embrace God's dream come true? And Bellarmine is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. So Homeboy Industries was started when I was pastor of the poorest parish in Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other. LAPD said my parish was the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere. There are 120,000 gang members in LA County, 1,100 gangs. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. I buried my 254th 3 weeks ago, a young man named Jeremy, who was 14 years old. Not all of them, obviously, from my parish, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. First thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So in the middle of the day, they were wreaking havoc and selling drugs and violent and writing on walls. So I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them a little bit, and I'd corner them and I'd say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't, you know, find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. And so right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8, occupying the first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor of this huge building was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns together one evening and I sat them down in their living room and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out, and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And I remember they looked at each other and they went, sure, like that. And that was the end of their entire discernment process. And so we're off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the church property. People in the parish would sidle up to me and say, wow, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, you know, good people in and bad people out? Which I thought was a good gospel challenge. And then in short order, the gang members started to say, you know, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, mainly women with children, lived there. We marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. And so we just started things, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the 8 gangs in the projects. And then in 1992, after the verdict of the 4 police officers who beat down Rodney King, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles erupted, except the poorest pocket, my parish. And the LA Times wanted to know why that was, and so I said, well, I don't know, you know, maybe it was because we had 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members who, I don't know, had a reason to get up in the morning, and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appears, and a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, summoned me to his Beverly Hills office, and he said, you tell me, how should I spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I see that I woefully undershot my request, but I was young, I had hair. And so I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it. It has ovens, they don't work. You could fix them. We could put hairnets on rival gang members. They could bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was exactly the entirety of my business plan. So he said, sure, and we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. And once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for Future, which is what we called ourselves, to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. Not everything worked. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now, as was mentioned in the kind introduction, we've backed our way, we've evolved our way into becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. And so 10,000 to 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to reimagine their lives. And they get in the 18-month training program. And the idea there is to transform your pain so you don't have to transmit it. At Homeboy, we're allergic to holding the bar up and asking gang members to measure up. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people their truth, which is your truth, which is everybody's truth. We were all born into this world wanting the same things, and we all share the same last name. And every single one of you is exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And everybody who hears that truth starts to believe it, because it is, after all, the truth. And then they become that truth, they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. And I'd like to think that 14-year-old Jeremy, who left us, knew that truth before he left us. At Homeboy, we know you have to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. In the Acts of the Apostle, it has a very odd line, and it says, "And awe came upon everyone," and it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. And Bellarmine is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from, where you can stand in what Ignatius called affectionate awe at what folks have to carry. Years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and it was what we call in the biz a gang in-service. So social workers commandeer a hotel ballroom, and they get credits, and they sign in, and they have keynote talks and workshops and breakout sessions, all to help educate social workers about gangs. And I'd done a million of these, and they invited me, and I said, sure. I figured I'd do a keynote or something, and so I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the letter that invited me, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I said to myself what the homies often say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I call in 2 homies like these 2 guys, Andre, African-American gang member, and Jose. And they were in the 18-month training program, so they're like in their 9th month. I sit them down. I said, look, you're flying with me at the end of the week to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he was like 25 years old at the time, and you know, he'd been to prison, tattooed, shot caller from his gang. At that juncture, at his 9th month in his 18 months with us, he had become a very valued member of the substance abuse team, and he was a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only had he been in prison and gangbanged, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. He says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got friggin' whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walked me up to an orphanage, and she knocked on the door, and the guy came to the door, and she said, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me with every single thing you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of your compassion lies not in your service of those on the margins, but only in your willingness to see yourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. Years ago, I was in Houston, and after a talk I gave, a guy came up to me who was a former gang member, tattooed, now working with gang members as a hardcore gang intervention worker on the streets of Houston. And he came up to me and he was kind of pleading with me, and he said, how do you reach them? You know, meaning gang members. And I found myself saying to him, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you allow your heart to be altered? Can you receive who these folks are? Bellarmine is not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from, but you don't go from here to make a difference. Then it's about you. It can't be about you. You go from here not to make a difference, but to stand at the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And then it's about us. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was just the best listener. If you were ever talking to him, nobody else existed. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once famously, a reporter had commented to him and he said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual." Bellarmine is not the place you go from to save, rescue, or fix the poor, but you go there to stand and to see people, and maybe they'll feel a little less invisible because you did. And it is exquisitely mutual. Together, as you see each other, you inhabit your own shared mutual dignity and nobility, you know, since you share the same last name, beings. At Homeboy, we always have, the issue of rival enemy gang members working side by side with each other. A homie will say, "I'm ready." In the old days, I would say, "Okay, I have an opening in the bakery, but you got to work with X, Y, and Z," and I'll rattle off the names of rivals. And homies would always do the same thing. They'd think for a second. They go, "Okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them." I remember when I was young and I had hair, I used to think, that really bothered me. But then you discover that it's impossible to demonize people you know. Human beings can't sustain that. And demonizing is always the opposite of the truth and always the opposite of how God sees things. So I had a homie named Youngster. Everybody called him Youngster, and he was 19 years old, and I thought he was ready, so I brought him to Homeboy Silkscreen, which is one of our 10 social enterprises. It's been around for 27 years. Thousands of gang members have worked side by side there, printing shirts and such, and they do high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to Tacoma. Just saying. And so I walk him in there, and I introduce him to his 30 coworkers, and half of them are from rival enemy gangs. And I watch Youngster shake hands and firm handshake and look people in the eyes. I think, wow, this is great. Until he gets to the last guy, a guy named Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they're from, but he just finished shaking hands with a whole bunch of enemies. I sense at the moment that this is a hatred that's really quite deep and personal, as I discovered later. And so sensing that in the moment, I look at the two of them and I said, "Look, if you can't hang working with each other, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job." Calladitos, they don't say a word. Well, 6 months later, Puppet leaves his house to go to a corner store some distance from his home, and he buys something. On his way home, for some reason, he takes a shortcut and he dodges into an alley. And suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. And they beat him badly. And he falls to the ground. And while he's lying there, they won't stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there at the hospital to keep him connected to machines for 48 hours so that you can have 2 full days of what they call a flat read, no brain activity at all, flat. And once it's 2 days of flat read, the decision got made and the doctors can sign the death certificate. I was at St. Louis University. I was giving a talk. I flew home right away. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head many times its size. It was truly horrifying. You couldn't train your eyes on him. So when the 48 hours passed, I anointed his forehead with oil. I said a blessing prayer. We disconnected, and a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, while Puppet was lying beaten in the hospital, I was alone in my office. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silkscreen factory. "Hey," he says, "that's messed up about what happened to Puppet." I said, "Yeah, it is." And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, "Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood?" And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears, and he says with great deliberation, "He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together." Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Of course. Any exceptions? No, I can't think of one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's dream come true, that we be one, is every human being's deepest longing. It shouldn't surprise us, because it's mutual. Bellarmine is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside of it. You go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You go from here to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. You go from here to stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. For no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we can wait for it. Thank you all very much.
Father Boyle, Raquan, and Jose, on behalf of the entire student body and the Bellarmine community, thank you for sharing your stories with us and being part of our Justice Summit. We are honored that you took time out of your busy schedule to bless us with your wisdom and presence. We will do our best to live out your message of compassion and kinship. We will stand, and we will see, and we will be changed. We wish you safe travels on your way back to Homeboy Industries, and know that you are always welcome to come back to our campus whenever you're in the area. So students, please join me in a final round of applause to thank our incredible speakers here today. Students, you are all dismissed. Thank you.